Going to go ahead and call this November 20th, 2017 meeting of the Whitefish City Council to order. Thanks everyone for coming. I would like to wish Jen a very happy birthday and ask her to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Or we can sing. Thanks very much, Jen. We'll move on to our communications from the public. We do have 4 public hearings this evening. So if you're here to comment on one of our public hearing items, please wait until that hearing is called. Otherwise, if you would like to share anything with the council, now's your opportunity. Your name and address for the record, please, at the podium. Any public communications tonight? Not seeing any. We will stay with the audience. Any volunteer board reports from the audience? Not seeing any there. How about the council? Not seeing any. We will move on to our consent agenda. I believe for the record, we will be removing item 5C, if I'm not mistaken. Michelle, is that correct? Which is consideration of approving the final plat for the Whitefish Creek subdivision. That has been removed per the request of the applicant, so we'll be acting on items 5A, B, D, and E, and I'll just need a motion to that effect. Andy.
I would move we approve the consent agenda as presented minus item C.
I'll second.
There's a motion on the table to approve the consent agenda minus item C. That was seconded by Councillor Franson. Further discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that carries unanimously. Which brings us quickly to our public hearings tonight, and we will start with item 6A, which is ordinance 17-33, the rezone of one parcel annexed into city limits from County SAG 5, which is their suburban agricultural, to our WCR, which is our equivalent county residential district, located at 453 Armory Road. Bailey.
Good evening. So the city is requesting a zone change on one parcel from County SAG 5, which is the suburban agricultural, to WCR, which is our country residential district. The parcel is located between Dodger Lane and Johns Way on the north side of Armory Road, and the parcel is now located within the city limits. The purpose of the rezoning was due to the adoption of Resolution 1742, which annexed this portion of the property into the city limits on September 5th. Since it's now in the city, we have to change the zone from a county zone to a city zone. There's a comparison between the SAG 5 and the WCR zoning districts on page 147 of your packet, if you'd like to compare the two. As I said, the property is along Armory Road, and it does total approximately 0.319 acres in size. The property is currently vacant. The growth policy does identify this parcel as a rural residential on the future land use map, and that is applicable to the WCR and WA10. We don't currently have a WA10, so WCR is equivalent to that. There is residential uses to the south and the east. There's the commercial, the BNSF Railroad to the north, and then the Armory Park is to the west as well. So we did mail a notice to the adjacent landowners within 150 feet of the property on September 29th. We also noticed advisory agencies and placed a legal in the pilot on October 4th. I've had no comments submitted on this project. So we reviewed the request in accordance with our zoning regulations. It does comply with the growth policy designation of rural residential. Public services and utilities are available to the property and will be extended to serve any building that is constructed. The zoning designation does include setbacks, maximum building height, lot coverage. Those would all be reviewed during a building permit application. The zone change will not affect any motorized or non-motorized transportation system. It is served by a paved city-maintained road, and the proposed uses in the district are very similar to each other. The character of the district is predominantly single-family residential. Lot sizes are comparable, and the proposed zoning is the most equivalent to the county designation that we currently have. Staff is recommended approval to the Whitefish Planning Board. They held, I lost my page. Too many staples. They held a meeting on October 19th. No members of the public spoke at that meeting. The draft minutes were included as part of your packet. Following the public hearing, the planning board did recommend approval as well, unanimously 5-0. And I included a proposed motion in your packet. So.
Thanks very much, Bailey, for the staff report. Any questions for Bailey? Andy?
Yeah, Bailey, I mean, I kind of know the answer to my own question, but I'll just ask it for maybe the public's edification as much as anything. But we're rezoning this into a zoning classification where the minimum lot size is 2.5 acres and it's 0.319 acres, and that's simply because the growth policy designation for that area says that's what we kind of have to zone it.
Yeah, and actually part of this property, the reason behind why they even annexed this is they wanted to do a boundary line adjustment between the parent tract, or the tract 5 and this tract. Well, they can't do a boundary line adjustment between a city property and a county property, so they had to annex this part. So there's actually been a boundary line adjustment that is occurring for this little piece will be connected into the other one as well. And it does have that same zone as well. But you are correct, this is the closest we have to that county zone.
Okay. Thank you.
Further questions? We did advertise for a public hearing on what will be ordinance 17-33, and we'll hold that public hearing now. Anyone wishing to provide comment, please address the council at the podium in your name and address for the record, please. Public comment tonight. Not seeing any, I'll close the public hearing and turn it back to the council for a motion. Andy?
I would move we approve WZC 17-20, adopting the findings of fact, relative staff report as recommended to us by our Whitefish Planning Board.
And I'll second.
Motion was seconded by Councilor Sweeney. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that carries unanimously as well. Michelle. Angela, I have a quick question for you, and I wanted to just give you a couple minutes to think about this question. It's related to item 6C on our agenda, the Firebrand Lounge conditional use permit. Does a conditional use permit for passage require the majority vote of those present, or do we need 4 votes? I think that's just for an ordinance, if I'm not mistaken. The majority of the elected officials, which would be 4, but in the case of a CUP, is it just the majority of those present?
I think it's the majority of those present, but give me 2 seconds, okay?
Yeah, that's why I wanted to ask.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. You're welcome. Thanks. We'll move on to item 6B, a request by Robert and Crystal Black for a conditional use permit to expand a non-conforming residential structure in a commercial zone located at 702 Greenwood Avenue. Bailey.
Okay, so the applicant is requesting a conditional use permit to expand a non-conforming residential structure and add an accessory apartment. They're combining the two together in a commercial WB2 zone. The lot was created in 1982 as part of the Greenwood Terrace subdivision. The majority of this subdivision is zone WR1. However, the first 5 lots along Greenwood Avenue are zone WB2. I tried to do some digging back to see why it's been that way, as far as I can tell, since the subdivision was approved. Currently, the property does have an existing residential structure on there, and the applicant is proposing to remodel the existing 2-car garage into a 1-car garage with additional living space and then a bonus area as well above it. The garage and upstairs storage area would not be part of the accessory apartment, so it will be, the accessory apartment would be under the 600 square foot threshold. And we are adding a condition that I'll get to later about that, to separating the two. So the addition will comply with all required setbacks in the WB2 zoning as well. The subject property is a little over 6,000 square feet. As I said, it's currently developed with a single-family residence. The north is residential as well. The west is vacant currently. And then the south is commercial and the east is residential. The growth policy designation for this property is urban on our future land use map, and that actually corresponds to the WLR, WR1, and WR2. So the growth policy land use does not match the current underlying zoning. It will be connected to all city services. We did mail a notice to the adjacent landowners on September 29th, placed a legal in the paper on October 4th. I've had no comments on this project at this time. So as I said, the growth policy identifies it as urban, and that does correspond to the WLR, R1, and R2. However, this property is zoned residentially, which does correspond to those as well. Let's see, the plans will be modified so that the living area is separate from the single-car garage and the upstairs bonus area. So as I said, that will make it meet our maximum square footage for the accessory apartment standards. It'll be about 424 square feet. The WB2 zoning does not list a minimum lot area or width, and the proposed use will comply with all development requirements in the WB2 zoning. The accessory apartment and the remodeled garage will access from the private driveway that extends from the existing public street of Greenwood Avenue in the front. 2 parking spaces are required for the single-family unit, and 1 parking space must be provided for the accessory apartment. The proposed property does appear to be able to comply with all of these requirements. There will be 1 space still in the single-car garage, and then the driveway can accommodate 2 spaces as well. The existing driveway is not currently paved, and so that is included as a proposed condition of approval, that they will have to pave the driveway per our zoning standards. Let's see, no hours of operation since it's a residential property. And the expansion would be attached to a single-family home. It'd be similar to adjacent residential uses in that area. So nothing outside, nothing commercial in that nature. So we are recommending approval with 10 conditions, and there's 3 that I want to touch base with you. So number 3, there's a door that was currently on the submitted plans that showed it going from the single-car garage to the accessory apartment. We are requiring that door be removed so that the accessory apartment and the garage and then the upstairs bonus area are separate, so they will meet that accessory apartment 600 square foot maximum standard. The driveway will be required to be paved, that's condition 5, and then our typical deed restriction for the accessory apartment that the owner must maintain on site. And I just want to note that this is a short-term rental zone, so that condition that normally we see on these accessory apartments is not included because they could do a short-term rental in the WP2. So the planning board met on October 19th and considered the request. No members from the public attended that or spoke at that meeting. The draft minutes were attached as part of your packet, and the board voted unanimously to recommend approval as well. So I'm happy to answer questions.
Thanks, Bailey. Any questions for Bailey? Frank?
A couple things, Bailey. I've heard the term bonus area as it relates to homes. I'm not sure I understand a bonus area as a separate from the apartment that's downstairs below it. I presume that the bonus area is really going to be part of that apartment. Is that correct?
It's not, no, and that's actually the condition that the door be removed because the stairs are located in the garage portion. The garage is connected to the main house. So there is no kitchen upstairs, there's no bathroom upstairs, it's just a big open area. People, we see them turn them into offices. It could be an extra bedroom, but it is separate from the accessory apartment. So the accessory apartment will not have any access to that area, and that is why we're requiring it as a condition. So it cannot be counted as part of the accessory apartment standards.
Cool. Second question, and looking at this, the picture that we've got here in our packet, and I understand there's a requirement that they have essentially 3 parking places, one of which would be theoretically in the garage. The logistics of having 1 in the garage and 2 in the driveway means that the 1 in the garage doesn't go anyplace, which means, sounds like to me, that one of those 2 that are sitting in the driveway would logically end up on the street most of the time. Is that an issue that we're facing here, or is that something we can address?
It's come up multiple times at other items like this. We've had that because we've also had it where people say, well, I've got 2 in the garage, and people here have snowmobiles and kayaks and bikes, and the garage starts filling up. Currently, we have nothing in our regulations that says that we can't count those. That's been our policy, is we count the 2 spaces in the garage and the driveway. As long as it's out of the right of way and off street, we consider them parking spaces. But your point has been brought up multiple times, and I don't have a good answer for that other than we realize, knowing, I mean, my garage is full of stuff, so I don't park in mine. But yeah, so I mean, right now, we don't have anything that we can use to say you can't count those as that, so.
I guess my point in this particular circumstance is we're designing it essentially so that we can almost guarantee that one of the vehicles associated with that facility is going to end up on the street on a full-time basis.
Potentially, but they show it, I mean, it measures the parking space, so, yeah.
Thanks, Frank. Further questions for Bailey? Not seeing any. We did advertise for a public hearing, which will be a conditional use permit to expand a non-conforming residential structure at 702 Greenwood Avenue. We'll hold that public hearing now. Any comment from the public? Oh, the applicant's here. Would you like to address the council? Sure. Just name and address for the record, please.
Cole Blackwell, 760 State Park Road.
Great, thank you. Any questions for the applicant's representative? Jen?
This particular property is a little different than ones we've seen before, particularly in neighborhoods which have shared alley access. What's the refuse plan for this particular property?
It would be the same as current city service.
So would there be, I guess what I'm getting at,
It'd
is
be
there a space
curbside.
for the container for
There
the?
is, yes. Yeah,
Okay.
there is. The driveways, we are going to widen them out when we take and pave them in the spring after we get the construction done. And those are going to be widened out to where there is going to be spots for containers.
Okay.
And another thing I will say about the parking spaces is this particular applicant, her husband is just retiring from the Navy, and they're just bought this home. They're moving here full-time. The mother-in-law quarter is actually for her mother-in-law,
Okay.
who can't drive. They plan on living here for as long as they possibly can. Obviously, future use, nobody can tell what the car situation is going to be, but currently it's going to be 2 cars. Any other questions?
I would just elaborate a little more in that I'm more concerned with where the storage container goes.
Okay.
And then if it were to be rented out to a non-family member, that they would have access to storage for that container as well.
There
where
is
that's
planned
planned
along
for.
the side of the garage.
Okay.
I think there's approximately, 7 feet right now, I think, Bailey, is about what it is to the side setback, I think it is. Okay, I think it's about 7 foot what the side setback is, so they do have room on the side of the garage to store them, when they're not being picked up that particular morning. They also have the back of the garage as well, that they could take and wheel it into.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thanks. Appreciate your time tonight. Further public comment on this item? Not seeing any. I'll close the public hearing and turn it back to the council for a motion or discussion. Andy?
I would move that we approve WCUP 17-09, findings of fact, staff report, subject to the 10 conditions as transmitted to us and recommended by our planning board.
Thanks, Andy. Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Franson. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand, and those opposed, like sign, and that again carries unanimously. Michelle, which brings us on to item 6C. Angie, did you have a chance to research that?
Have more than 3 voting on this, and I apologize to the applicant who's here, and I hate to make him come back in a couple of weeks, but I think that would probably be the right way to do it.
Okay, so we'll look for a motion to postpone this evening, but we will go ahead with the public hearing and a presentation from the applicants since we're in attendance, and we can elect to keep the public hearing open to the December 4th meeting if you wish. On that note, we do have a request by the Firebrand Lounge LLC for a conditional use permit for a bar lounge located at 650 East 3rd Street, and this will be Whitefish conditional use permit 17-08. Wendy?
Good evening. So this is a request by the Firebrand Hotel to operate an all beverage license in their restaurant lounge at 650 East 3rd Street. The property is on WB3, and the WB3 zoning district requires a conditional use permit for any bar lounge. Just as a little background, in case you forgot, These folks received a conditional use permit in February of 2015, which was a requirement because the building footprint exceeded 7,500 square feet in the WB3. Last year, about this time, the City Council amended the conditions of approval for that conditional use permit in order to facilitate the locating the hot tub on the roof of the building. So both the conditions for the original CUP and the amended CUP have been met. The growth policy designation for this property is core commercial, which corresponds to the WB3. We did notice adjacent landowners, advisory agencies, and placed a notice in the paper, and we didn't receive any comments. We review these according to the criteria in the zoning regulations for conditional use permits. The proposal complies with the growth policy designation of core commercial. It's meeting all of the zoning standards. The site is suitable. They're not proposing to do any sort of changes to the site or the building or the access or anything. It's all going to happen internally, of course. So pretty much all the site stuff is being handled. We don't anticipate any additional traffic. The hours of operation will conform to state law. And as far as neighborhood and community compatibility, downtown Whitefish is home to a variety of restaurants, bars, and retail uses, and so this is pretty comparable to what's already going on down there. The planning board did hold a public hearing on October 19th and unanimously recommended approval. The applicant spoke and nobody else from the public spoke. The planning board did amend one of the conditions. So just to hit a couple of highlights of the conditions, one of them is that the all beverage license would be approved by the Montana Liquor Control Board. And then no bar, temporary or permanent, and that's what the planning board added, can be located on the rooftop patio. Can I answer any questions for you?
Thanks, Wendy. Any questions for Wendy on her staff report? Not seeing any. Thanks, Wendy. We did advertise for a public hearing on WCUP 17-08, and we'll hold that public hearing now. Brian, do you have anything you'd like to add, or would you like to address the council? You don't have to, but I think this is your time, for sure. Thanks.
Well, Brian Averill, thanks for your continued evaluation on the Firebrand. I know we've been in front of you guys a number of times, so thank you. As a reminder, we opened up about a year and a half ago. Since then, we've operated a beer and wine license, and one of the challenges that we found with that license, and also kind of a source of guest frustration, was that it didn't have the liquor component and kind of the amenities, as you will, surrounding the beer and wine license. And a quick example of what I mean by that is that if a guest orders room service, we can bring him his entree, but if he orders a glass of wine with that room service, he has to go get it himself. And that's a stipulation with how that beer and wine license works in a hotel environment. We tried really hard to make that work, a huge investment with an all beverage license, but for a lot of reasons, including that simple example, we've decided that, to build our reputation and build customer service and rate to the hotel, we need this all beverage license, so which brings us here today.
Great. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks.
In case there's any questions, Frank.
Brian, it goes to the lunacy that we operate in with these liquor licenses these days. Yeah. Does a full beverage license then allow you to bring a bottle of wine to a client in their room at this point?
It does, yeah.
So that's the requirement?
Yes, it deals with the footprint of a beer and wine license and how that's different from what you can do with an all beverage license.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any further questions for Brian? Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
We'll call on you if anything arises again. Further public comment tonight on this item? Further comments? I'll go ahead and close the public hearing. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and keep the public hearing open, and I'll turn it back to the council for discussion or motion. Jen?
Mr. Mayor, I am going to recuse myself from a decision tonight. The Firebrand is a client of ours, so I would not feel comfortable making a decision one way or another. So I'll recuse myself from a decision and discussion.
Thank you, Jen. Frank?
Pursuant to our discussion and the need for more than 3 counselors to be able to vote on this, I would move to postpone this matter to our next council meeting and have it, and leave the public hearing open.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Which, for clarification, is to postpone to the December 4th meeting, and we will hold the public hearing open. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that does carry with a 3 vote, with Jen abstaining for the record. Thanks, Brian. We'll see you in a couple weeks. We'll move on to item 6D, which will be ordinance 17-34, adopting Chapter 5, Public Ways and Property Grounds and Vegetation, to Title 7 of Whitefish City Code, regulating the planting, maintenance, and removal of public trees within the city of Whitefish, authorizing the Director of Parks and Recreation to regulate public trees, providing for measures to assure public safety, and providing penalties for violation.
Good evening.
Maria, good evening.
That's a mouthful, huh?
It is.
So the staff report is on page 229, and this ordinance is addressing trees, public trees and private trees that are adjacent to the right-of-way or in the right-of-way. So historically, the Whitefish City Code has regulated trees within the city just through the subdivision regulations, and it does not adequately address all the public trees in right-of-ways, parks, or other open spaces, so that's why this is before you this evening. The Tree Advisory Committee did begin the process of crafting the city tree ordinance by working with the Parks and Recreation Department, the city attorney, and Whitefish Lake Golf Association. And they did recommend approval of the tree ordinance after several revisions on their April 2017 meeting. They moved it then to the Park Board, who reviewed it, and in May, the Park Board unanimously approved the ordinance. As well, they directed staff to establish a working group to develop the MOU with the Whitefish Lake Golf Course, as it is indicated in the ordinance. We did put that working group together, and the city attorney and Parks and Recreation staff and members of the Tree Advisory Committee and Park Board all met with the Whitefish Lake Golf Course Board, and we drafted the MOU. We had several meetings and revisions, but on October 2017, the Park Board unanimously approved the MOU, which is also included in your packet. This ordinance offers the following protections. It offers prevention of disturbance to public trees without written approval from the Parks and Recreation Director prior to working on public trees. It offers prevention of the removal or replacement of public trees without written approval from Parks and Recreation Director prior to working on public trees. The removal of obstructions to public right-of-ways from private trees, protection of trees from the impacts of construction projects, the protection of the public in relation to work performed on public trees, and it provides for penalties associated with non-compliance of the ordinance. There is no financial obligation for this ordinance, and I can answer any questions, but staff, along with the Whitefish Park Board of Commissioners and the Tree Advisory Committee, respectfully recommend that you do adopt this ordinance.
Thanks, Maria, for the staff report. Any questions for Maria? Frank?
I have one for Angie. Angie, does this, given recent history and recent occurrences in this valley and in the county with respect to removal of public trees, that particular matter is being pursued on a felony basis? If something like that were to occur in the city with respect to our trees of similar value and impact, would we be allowed, or be with this ordinance in place, would it restrict what level of prosecution we could bring or could requests be brought against the individual who violated?
Level of prosecution could be brought against the individual, because they could always charge them under state law, and therefore for a felony. I think this gives us the ability. We had an instance where they were moving, I think a house actually, and they literally uprooted one of our trees and then put it back in the ground to die. And so Christie actually pursued that, I believe, both civilly and criminally, if not just civilly. So I don't think it restricts our ability to ask that somebody who damages $30,000, $40,000 worth of our trees be prosecuted criminally under the state statutes.
Thanks, Frank. Further questions for staff? We did advertise for a public hearing on what will be ordinance 17-34, and we'll open that public hearing now. Anyone wishing to provide testimony this evening? Any public comment on this item? Not seeing any, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing and turn it back to the council. And as a reminder, since this is an ordinance, it will require 4 votes of approval for passage. Frank.
I would move to approve ordinance 17-34, adopting Chapter 5, Public Ways, Property Grounds, and Vegetation to Title 7 of the Whitefish Code, regulating the planting and maintenance and removal of public trees within the city of Whitefish, and authorizing the Director of Parks and Recreation to regulate the public trees, providing a measure of assurance for public safety and providing penalties for violations.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Franson. Further discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that passes unanimously as well. Michelle. Thanks, Maria. We'll move on to item 7A. You have Adam's written report enclosed with your packet. Any questions for Adam? Not seeing any, Adam. Anything to report on?
Nothing else at this time. Thanks.
Great, thank you. We will move on to item 8A, which we've taken care of. We did have volunteer board appointments earlier in the meeting, in our work session, and those appointments were all made. So we can quickly move on to councilor comments. Andy, would you like to begin?
If I can get my mic to turn on there. Happy birthday to Jen, of course. And we spared you our singing, fortunately. I'd like to thank both Adam and Katie for being here, both post recent tooth extractions. I know it's not fun, painful, and sitting here is probably the worst place you can think of being, but I'm glad you guys are here, and thank you very much. So, and hopefully you both feel better soon.
Thanks, Andy. Jen? Thanks, Jen. Frank?
Happy Thanksgiving to all.
Don't eat too much turkey. Katie?
I'm actually gonna, if you can understand me. I was able to watch the meeting that I missed last week or 2 weeks ago, and I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who showed up and showed their support for the affordable housing project, and document that went up to vote that we just passed through our consent agenda. And I think, as stated 2 weeks ago, and I will continue to say, this is just the beginning. The devil's in the details, and this is when the hard work really kicks in. So I'm looking to see what comes of this whole project. Thanks.
Thanks, Katie. I had a few things. Tomorrow night at 6:30 here in these chambers, we're having our first liaison team meeting. As you may recall, when we finalized the Haskell Basin Conservation easement, there was an exhibit that was attached to that easement, which was our multi-resource management plan, and it basically requires that annually the City of Whitefish, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and F.H. Stoltz Land and Lumber Company meet in a public forum to discuss any issues that may arise related to the conservation easement, and it will also be an opportunity to take public comment on the easement. So that's going to be held tomorrow night. There'll be 2 representatives from Stoltz, myself, as well as Alan Wood with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and then Adam's going to be attending as well. So everyone's invited. It was noticed publicly, so I encourage folks, if they do have concerns, issues, questions, that they attend the meeting tomorrow night. And again, it starts at 6:30. Dave, I had a question. When earlier we had our Lakeshore Protection Committee appointments, and Andy and I both brought up the issue that we dealt with this summer related to the beach gravel, or the addition of beach gravel for that one application.
Right.
We had asked that planning office, draft a text amendment or to clarify that portion of the code. Has that been initiated?
Bailey brought that up with the Lakeshore Committee. They talked about it. They kind of were split on how to proceed with that. She kind of put the ball in their court to come up with some different language. They haven't really figured out how to address that more specifically. I think, one of the issues with that was that they didn't put together very good findings for denial, and they weren't consistent between the different applications. And so we talked to them about in the future, if they are gonna deny it, to make sure that they have good findings for denial and that they're consistent about it. So, I mean, if you guys really want a change or a clarification of the ordinance, we can certainly bring that forward. We just kind of put that in the Lakeshore Committee's hands to try to come up with a solution. And I just think that, you know, from our perspective, we're waiting on them to see how they want to pursue it. You know, because they had some concerns. I know they sent a letter to you
Right.
guys and stuff. I mean, staff feels like the language is sufficient. It's just a matter of, you know, if they are gonna deny something, that they need to have a better set of findings.
So you'll circle back with us once the committee's made a recommendation?
yep.
Okay. I appreciate that.
Sure.
Finally, I'd just like to give a big shout out to all the volunteers who over the weekend helped, I believe Whitefish Shines, set up the holiday decorations throughout town. It looks phenomenal. Now, if we could only get this rain to change to snow, it would look very festive in town. So a big thanks to Chris Schustrom, Whitefish Shines, and all the volunteers that showed up to make that happen. On that note, we are adjourned. Thanks.